restore family counseling. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I'm from Mississippi, that's why I talk this way, so I always get asked. I've lived here for about 5 years, I think. But I'm super nervous, so y'all bear with me. I'm thinking, I don't know if I have any other Dancing with the Stars fans, but I'm thinking, if they can get out there and do all that dancing and they've never done it in their lives, I can do this. So we're going to do it. This is weird, Tiffany. I'm trying to get it.
I know.
Yeah, it's weird. This is a super personal topic for me. So I'm going to share a little story with y'all first. So there is this person who was raised in a home, a great home, but both parents were involved the whole time. Tight-knit family, 2 sisters, this person's the oldest. Never thought that trauma would happen to her. And so when she was born, though, she had a medical condition that involved really invasive testing done. And so right away, as a newborn, this girl faced these struggles, this trauma that repeatedly went on until she was probably 10 or 11, and was pretty much told, like, it's not trauma, you have to do this. We're going to sit here and hold you down while you're wide awake, and you have to go through this. And so went all her years until she was probably 21, thinking that's normal, that's what happens. Well, that girl ended up getting to be about 15 and tried alcohol for the first time. She'd been told never drink, never do drugs. Your grandfather is a horrible alcoholic, drug addict who was physically abusive, all the things you don't want to be like him. And she ended up loving alcohol right away. It took away that nervousness and that anxiety, and it was that relief of, I can do anything. She found attention in guys and loved that. Actually had a boyfriend for quite a while. And then some stuff happened. Some really traumatic experiences happened, but she blamed herself for all of those things that happened and didn't see them as trauma until years after they happened. And they happened when she was probably 18 through 20, 21 years old. So eventually, she turned to other substances and tried pretty much everything you can think of, except for heroin, and maybe that's it. She usually would do stuff she didn't realize, she knew what she was doing, and just totally lost herself and got to the place of thinking like Keely talked about shame. There's so much shame. How can anybody ever love me? How can God ever love me? How can I continue living? And so she planned to take her life, and that day she had prayed to God in forever and prayed and said, God, please do something. I can't live this way anymore. And her parents hadn't heard from her in a week or two, and they were 4 hours away, and they showed up in the parking lot of her job waiting for her because they said God had sent them a sign you've got to go do something before she takes her life. And that girl was me. And so here I am 7 years later. Thank you. So that was June 1st of 2017. And I've been sober ever since, and my life has just completely changed. I mean, it's just, I'm a therapist now. Going through that is what really led me to be where, I am today. And I have an amazing husband. He's actually in recovery too, and so great having that support. We have a son who's 1 next week, and it's just the most beautiful experience, but there's so much pain. And I'm just curious, you don't have to raise your hand, but how many people in here know somebody or are affected by addiction somehow in their life, whether it be friends, people you work with? It's so common. It's so common, and it's brushed under the rug so much and just overlooked. And it's very real, and I'm so excited about the afternoon session on social media because that's a big addiction too. So that's my personal, how I relate to this, I have a lot of passion about it. We probably won't get to everything. We might, I can surprise myself, but if we don't, y'all have the slides. Feel free to like go through and read them, because I'm not gonna rush it. So yes. So we'll see what we can do. So ASOM, which is the American Society of Addiction Medicine, states addiction is a treatable chronic medical disease involving complex interactions among brain circuits, genetics, the environment, and an individual's life experiences. People with addiction use substances or engage in behaviors that become compulsive and often continue despite harmful consequences. So that's a really pretty intense definition of it, very scientific. So if you need to break it down, you can definitely go back through that. But I thought it was interesting because, as this says, the Romans, way back when, used the word addictus to refer to a person who failed to pay a debt and was assigned as a slave to the creditor. And now we view addiction as this enslavement to a habit, whether it be drugs, alcohol, sex, video games. That's a huge one, with teens and preteens. You name it, it's that habit. So the issue with addiction is not the quantity or frequency, but the impact. And I'll touch on that a little bit more after a bit. Pretty much what that is saying is you can get diagnosed for having a substance use disorder, and some of that criteria is kind of based off of how often you're doing it, but really you want to look at the impact that addiction has. So like disrupted connections with family, pulling away, all of those things, just losing control of life is what has such a big impact. The why. This is huge. I love Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps a Score, and he has a quote and he says, we need to talk about what drives people to take drugs. People who feel good about themselves don't do things that endanger their bodies. Traumatized people feel agitated, restless, tight in the chest. You hate the way you feel. You take drugs in order to stabilize your body. And that's just a great explanation of why. There's a lot of myths with addiction, and I didn't put that up here, but some of them are along the lines of, like, why do they do this when they know it hurts them? Well, because they're hurting, and they want to keep doing it to mask that pain. It's shame, and I'm so glad Keely talked about shame first, because shame is such a big part of addiction. These things happen because of pain. This says people seek addiction to help regulate body and mind and to run from distress and constant restlessness. And we need to look through the lens of not why the addiction, but why the pain. The origins of addiction are pain. So whenever I know a lot of people in here, whether you're a counselor or foster parents, or anybody who knows somebody in their life with addiction, a big thing is looking at where that comes from. It's not saying, well, yeah, of course you want to stop the addiction, but I'll tell you from personal experience, if you do not get to the root of the pain, the addiction is still going to be there in other forms, or if it's not there, they're going to be miserable. And with teenagers who go through this, there's a lot of resentment that builds up, a lot of anger towards the parents, and I could go on and on. So it's so important to look at why the pain. Hallmarks of addiction. This is pretty much looking at Gabor Mate, who is a Canadian. I think he has all kinds of credentials. I don't even know, but I know he has MD, and so his book is over there. Somebody might have gotten it. I don't know, but he is just so amazing and so smart, and he came up with these. He actually worked in, I think it was Vancouver, where addiction is super prevalent, and would take people in and help them and all this, and he came up with these hallmarks and said this is like a big part of where addiction stems from. So compulsion is the first one, and Merriam-Webster defines compulsion as an irresistible, persistent impulse to perform an act. It's important to know though, like not all compulsions are bad, okay? So, I mean, they're not healthy, but not all harmful compulsions are going to lead to addiction. So like obsessive compulsive disorder, somebody who might feel the need to go and lock the door so many times in order to be able to sleep at night and establish that safety. If it disrupts their life, yeah, it's not healthy, but that doesn't mean that's an addiction. Does that make sense? We're just kind of, it can be different. But compulsion is one of the key parts of addiction. It's a compulsion to use that substance or to engage in that behavior. Impaired control is the next one. And this means not stopping the behavior despite all of the negative consequences that are going on. You know, maybe somebody promises themselves or their spouse or their parents, their family, like, I promise I'm going to stop. Like, I'm going to go and get help. Then they relapse after, say, a week, or they don't go get help, but they keep saying, I promise. That is just impaired control. Some don't even recognize the harm that's going on. They're so detached, especially if they don't have support. And then some just say, you know what, I'm going to risk it, and I'm going to live my way or the highway, and I'm going to do this. Like, if I die this way, that's how it's going to be. And that's, obviously, there's a lot of hurt there within that person. The next one is persistence, which kind of ties into impaired control with persistently still engaging, even though negative consequences are happening. Irritability is a very big one. Irritability can look like so many things. Obviously, substances can change a person and how they act, but irritability, if they don't have the substance or the behavior, I'll get into that more in a bit, but that's a big one. Relapse, which is whenever somebody returns heavily back to that behavior or that substance after they've been clean from it for a bit. And then cravings, which is what it sounds like, just that intense urge and craving for that substance. I keep wanting to say, do y'all have any questions? But can't do that. The development of addiction. This might get kind of complicated, so I'm going to directly read off of my things so that I give you all the correct information. This is like brain stuff. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but I will spend some. So, genetics do play a part in addiction. I think there has been a misconception, though, that that's like the full part, like, it's in my family, I'm going to get it. Don't get me wrong, yes, absolutely. If it is in your family, like my grandfather and then his parents, like there's a long line of it in my family. So yes, I did indeed probably have some gene, but that isn't the full reason why addiction happens. So if you have kiddos whose parents, which I know that's the case for a lot of y'all, whose parents had an addiction, they might have been using, drinking while they were pregnant even. That doesn't mean they're guaranteed to have an addiction, but it is something to kind of be on the lookout for. So genes dictate the basic organization, developmental schedule, and anatomical structure of the nervous system. Often they play a part in addiction, but are not the sole cause. Environment is the big contributing factor, okay? So environment is going to play a major role in the development of addiction. Nutrition, physical security, and consistent emotional nurturing are critical environmental factors that contribute to brain development. And unfortunately, in the Western culture nowadays, emotional nurturance is not always there. It's sometimes, I can't tell you how many times I hear with clients, even like, I was taught you don't talk about your feelings, and we didn't do that in my house. So the lack of that is such a big thing. Attachment relationships are crucial environmental factors that have an influence on the development of the brain, and I'll get more into that here in a minute. But just think about an infant, and if you've had an infant in your home, whether you actually gave birth to one or adopted, fostered, sibling, I don't know, but you know they depend on that sole caregiver for everything, right? Like a baby can't change its own diaper, a baby can't do anything really, but cry when they need something. And so if that caregiver is not present for them and giving those things to them, immediately that attachment is disrupted because they're learning, I'm not safe, I'm not cared for, I don't know how I'm going to survive. You know, they probably aren't having those direct thoughts, right? But their body is storing this information and learning this because trauma is stored within our body. You know, even if we don't remember it, it's still stored within our body. Positive experiences can lead to healthy brain development. Okay. The prefrontal cortex, which I'm just going to kind of go through this quicker since Tiffany also just touched on this, but the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala work together to help us survive and determine threat and danger. But what happens is addiction disrupts their balance. So the prefrontal cortex is the part of our brain where we're able to think through things and process through things, right? The amygdala is there to say, danger, you know, something's happening, go get help now. What happens is addiction, whenever I'll say we because I've experienced it, but you start to feel emotional and physical distress if you haven't engaged in that addiction. So you start to have withdrawals once it's out of your system for so long. And what happens during that time is you go into survival mode because you are at the point of, I am going to, you know, somebody I know who was on opioids, my husband, he won't mind me saying that, he always shares a story too. He will say, I felt like I was dying. Like I absolutely was like, I'm dead. And he was in treatment, you know, he was getting medical help. But he was like, I just cannot live this way anymore. Like this is the sickest I've ever felt in my life. So imagine going through that and trying to be happy and go to work and do all these things, go to school that are sometimes expected of people who are going through it. It sucks and it is super hard to do. Dopamine is the big chemical that supports all of this. So we all have dopamine in our body, in our brain. It plays a part in the reward system. It's actually one of the most primitive parts of the brain because it helps us survive. So a dopamine hit feels good. Whenever you do that, you say, oh, I'm going to do this again. So like eating. When we eat, we get a hit of dopamine. Therefore, we're like, I need this to survive. I've got to make sure I eat again. This feels good. So what happens is addictive substances and behaviors trigger an outsized response of dopamine. So I think it's usually like 10 times bigger response of dopamine to the brain. The brain remembers that surge and it associates it with the addictive substance and that behavior. Brain circuits adapt with chronic use, becoming less sensitive to dopamine, building a tolerance, and needing more and more of that substance to generate the level of high that you crave. And cravings are intense desires and urges for the substance or behavior that can be very difficult to resist. Right, so that's it on the brain. I'm going to go on to the next thing. Co-occurring disorders. So usually with addiction, there are other mental health issues going on. A lot of times, of course, with trauma, you might have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, ADD, ADHD, bipolar disorder. The list goes on and on and on. And over 60% of adolescents in community-based substance use disorders treatment programs also meet the diagnostic criteria for another mental illness. And that's not even looking at behavioral addictions. You know, this is just saying substances. So that's not sex, that's not video games, that's not phones, that's just talking about substance use. So that's a pretty big number. The different types of addiction. So there is, y'all heard me say substance versus behavioral. Basically what this is saying is behavioral focuses on an activity or a behavior, and substance focuses on drugs and alcohol. When I say drugs, I mean there's all kinds of stuff now people can get at smoke shops that's technically legal that is just as bad, like kratom and Delta 8 and all of these things that can be really, really dangerous. That falls into this category too. So even if it's legal, it can still be considered a drug. So similarities are they both offer temporary relief from emotional pain, and they release those feel-good hormones like the dopamine. Difference between substance abuse and addiction. This is a question I get a lot with my clients, with my job. There is definitely a difference. People who abuse drugs and alcohol still will have some type of control over their life usually. Addiction is more viewed as a disease that affects most, if not all, areas of a person's life. And this means like endangering their family, their livelihood. Often they might miss school or work, get in legal trouble, even endanger their families physically and financially. That's a big one. Health issues could be there, like cirrhosis of the liver for someone with alcoholism. And still there's that use, like I still have to have this. You know, I can't cope with this pain, this emotional pain. Even with dire consequences, people with an addiction cannot change their habits to improve their situation. Eventually they can, but in the moment, that's just not just that easy as changing that habit. And then individuals with substance abuse are able to learn from negative consequences and change their behaviors. So they're not going to go back to it time and time and time and time again. Trauma, this is what I wish I could spend forever talking about, but that's just not going to happen. I have such a big heart for this because at the root of addiction pretty much always is trauma. Usually there's some denial that that's true, but the more you dig and talk with somebody, you're going to see trauma is trauma. It doesn't matter how big or how small. It all affects us differently. So trauma, addiction, trauma, and shame. Addiction often is a trauma response. An individual who experienced significant trauma or who even has PTSD can get stuck in that constant fight, flight, freeze, or fawn that Keely talked about. That is super, super, super exhausting on your nervous system. So when that happens, there's usually a need to try and find a way to cope through that. Hence addiction, that dopamine hit to try and take away that pain. Like it says, this can lead to needing a way to cope and escape. Nervous system is exhausted and needs release, and then addiction creates and fuels shame. So shame was probably already there, but now it's just that constant fueling of shame. Even though an individual feels shame from addiction, they will continue engaging in it to cope with the pain of shame. So it's kind of like, why? You know, I've had people say, well, why do they keep doing this? Like, look at how bad they feel. Well, it's because they feel so bad. They feel that shame. And like I said with my story, I felt like nobody would ever love me. You know, I never thought I would get married and have a husband. I was just like at my wit's end. That shame becomes so, so heavy. Traumatic experiences and sex addictions. I'll just kind of skim through this real quick. This is just giving you some examples of how sex addictions can come from traumatic experiences and what that looks like. So being invalidated for who they are, not being recognized emotionally, being led to believe that they were not good enough for their parents or for their peers, or for teachers. I have some, people I know who teachers had such a big impact on them. And if there was one teacher who even was very, very spiteful towards them, that fueled a lot of shame. Feeling rejected or abandoned, being subjected to divorce or the death of a loved one, experiencing a substantial loss like a friendship, a pet, young love, teenage love, that sort of thing, and then not being allowed to pursue desires and interests. And I understand, you have to have boundaries with like pursuing desires and interests, but this is talking about just always being shut down, not having the opportunity, even if they're healthy, to pursue them. Attachment, which has been talked about a lot, so I'll give you all the brief synopsis on kind of the different types. And this is just a really easy way to remember these attachment styles. So, like I said, even in utero, we start to develop that attachment with our mom who's carrying us. That attachment starts from the get-go because the baby is attached to mom and getting everything from mom even then, which is one of the reasons why skin-on-skin contact has found to be so helpful, because that's securing, that's giving that attachment. So we are developed to have secure attachment, which is, I trust me and I trust you. Like, yeah, I have those boundaries, I know I can't always trust somebody, but I'm not going to be scared of everybody. And I'm not going to be scared of myself and always doubt myself. Avoidant attachment is I trust me, but I do not trust you. So walls up. Y'all might know some kiddos this way. Even adults too, of course. Like, I'm not going to let you in. It is going to take walking through a war to let you in with me. I've been hurt so much that I will never let anybody in again. That's that avoidant attachment. Anxious is the opposite. It's I trust you and I need you to do all these things for me, but I cannot trust myself. I cannot trust myself to make any decision. And a lot of times that comes from maybe even being raised in a home where the child learned, in order for mom and dad to be happy, I have to be happy. And there's many other examples, but that's a pretty common one. And then disorganized is a combination. It's I don't trust me and I don't trust you. It's push and pull. So it's one minute I really, really, really hate you. The next minute, whenever you say, okay, well then, I'm leaving. No, please don't leave, come back. That sort of thing, that push and pull is disorganized. This is one that you might see a good bit with children who are raised in a home with addiction, where it's really unpredictable whether dad's going to come home intoxicated or he's going to come home nice. It's like you don't know what's going to happen. So that is a quick rundown on attachment. And the last part of this is how can you help? So there are so many ways you can help. But first, I want to go through some warning signs for addiction in youth. And honestly, y'all, this can be for anybody with addiction, not just youth. So if you're wanting to help somebody or you're on the lookout, this is great for anyone. The first thing is going to be changes in mood. There are like abrupt changes where you had such a sweet, loving child, and then all of a sudden that mood is just like quickly changed when there's probably been something that's happened, whether it's trauma or something like that. But addiction can do that. Substances are going to change our brain, as I talked about. So mood is a big thing. Problems with academics, that's not always the case. There are some people with addiction who can just do amazing with academics and hide it. They actually can hide it with that. But if you see problems with academics, that's another one. Changing friends, this is a big one. So changing friends and being very reluctant to let you meet these friends. That's always a warning sign, even if it's not addiction involved. If there's that big reluctance to allow other friends and loved ones to meet these people, there's something usually going on there. A nothing matters attitude, and I know teenagers just kind of have that attitude a lot of times. I still have it some days, but if you see that all the time, like I don't have a care in the world, That's a warning sign. Finding substances or that they've been on websites like Tiffany was talking about, anything that you're finding that your children maybe are using, even like, I know nowadays there's like, they're called, I think, Zen packs, which are the dip thing, I don't know. I hear about all this stuff that's so easy to get. So if you find a whole bunch of different things that you had no idea your child or teen was doing, that's usually kind of a red flag. And I know they're going to experiment, with stuff like tobacco and whatnot, but it is still something to be on the watch for. And then changes physically and mentally. I almost, and I decided not to, but I almost was going to share a picture and at the beginning of me, and I was going to be like, you don't know who this is, but it's me. And I just couldn't bring myself to do it. It's still really hard for me to see those pictures, but if you had seen me physically, that was a big flag for my parents, was people were reaching out to them saying, is Taylor okay physically? She does not look well. So you might notice a lot of just like their face, sometimes it just looks like emptiness, loneliness is there. Sometimes their eyes literally will like seep in. I could go on and on. I would encourage y'all to research this so you are kind of on the lookout for what some physical signs are. And then mentally, of course, really maybe isolating a lot, hiding a lot, super down, self-harm. And addiction can be viewed as self-harm even, not just, self-mutilation isn't the only form of self-harm. So, helping those with addiction, real quick. So, like I said, this can be for anybody, not just teens. But the big one is provide empathy. Be there for them. Pause before you respond with judgment. And I know it's not always intended to have that judgment, but it can happen. And empathy coming from somebody, empathy meant so much to me. I was so much more receptive to get help whenever somebody came to me with empathy. It took a few times, but eventually I accepted it. Assist them in seeking out treatment, whether that's medical and or psychological. If there is a big substance addiction, I would always encourage you to seek out medical help and make sure there is nothing that needs to happen, because those withdrawals can be so dangerous. I had said opioids feel like you're dying, but there are other ones that will kill you in withdrawal. So if you, like benzo, super dangerous, seizures, there's a lot of stuff. Alcohol withdrawal can be super dangerous. So it's really important just to kind of cover your bases with that and make sure. There are medications that they have now, assisted treatment for addiction that is very, it's safe and it's effective. So seeking out help with that, and then psychological, of course, counseling, going inpatient. If they go inpatient to a rehab, usually there's going to be medical treatment there first. So usually what happens with that is when they get admitted, they will be in the detox unit first, being watched in surveillance 24/7 to make sure their withdrawals and all of these things are working effectively. And I used to work, before I worked at Restore, I worked at UT in their intensive outpatient program. So I would see a lot of detox stuff because we had a nurse practitioner who specialized in that. So it's super important to be on top of this. Accept relapse. Relapse is a sustained return to heavy and frequent substance or behavior use that existed prior to treatment or the commitment to change. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but if it happens, just be there for them and help them get back up when it happens. There's nothing that sucks more than relapsing after you've been clean from that substance or that behavior. It is talk about shame. And I'm so blessed that I haven't had to experience that. I know it can always happen, but knowing some people who did experience it, that is one of the hardest things to admit to. So if they come to you and talk about it, wow, that shows a lot of strength. So just being there for them through that. Be aware of withdrawal. I just talked to y'all about that. And then be patient. Usually it takes 90 days of abstinence for the healing within the brain to take place and for those new neural pathways to develop. Our brains are amazing, you know, neuroplasticity, they're able to really heal and work through things, but it does take time. And even encouraging the individual, you know, recovering that, hey, just remember, like, it's gonna take time. This isn't a quick fix. It's okay to still have some really bad days. It's okay to still have cravings. Come and talk to me through them. Like, let's work through them. Avoid enabling. I was gonna, if I had time and I don't, I was gonna tell y'all about codependency, but you can look into that. That was a term that was coined through Alcoholics Anonymous years and years ago, used for so many other things now though. But it was talking about how usually it's anxious attachment or disorganized. You want that person to, they're not happy unless I do all these things for them. So they keep asking me for money and, you know, they said they're sober, but there are some signs that show they're not. So I'm just going to keep giving them this money anyways, even though they're blowing through it like crazy. That would be enabling and a sign of codependency. Don't treat the individual like an outcast. Absolutely not. Please, please, please. Like, that empathy is so important. Avoid judgment. And remember, it's not your fault. I know with my parents, it was so hard for them to, like, work through their shame from it. I remember my mom, like, stayed in bed for days crying before they came and got me. She was so just like, what happened? Like, what could I have done? And I remind her time and time again, like, you know, it's not your fault. It is not your fault. So, prevention for kids and teens, remain attuned to your children's needs. So just be there for them. Show them that support. That's what attunement is. Foster secure attachment. Even if they don't have secure attachment, you can help them develop it. Our attachment styles aren't always set in stone. You know, they can develop a secure attachment with you. So foster that. Give that to them. Encourage emotion regulation. Therapy is how you learn emotion regulation. That's coping skills, grounding techniques, all of these things. Learning that big emotions are going to happen and it is okay that they happen. I have ways to work through them, and sometimes I have to sit with them for a little bit and just know that they'll pass. And then your daily dose of happy brain chemicals, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. You can, I don't have time, I was going to tell you all about these, but you can Google this, just say like happy chemicals, how to get your daily dose of them. And you'll find little charts, and it just kind of gives you tools that you can do and that you can do with your kids too, because these happy chemicals, we need them. And when we don't have them, depression, anxiety, all these things come up. So there's tons. You can say how to hack your happy chemicals, and you'll find stuff. And then treat risk factors such as loneliness, stress, depression, and anxiety. And the last thing is breaking the stigma. Luckily, I think in today's culture, stigma is being broken. It's still there, but you see well-known people sharing their stories. I know when I got sober, I was like so amazed at, like, of all the people, Bradley Cooper, all these people who were just like, I'm in recovery and sharing their amazing stories. It just made me, at the time, you know, I was like, whoa, even like super famous people have this, and a lot of them do, because there's a lot of trauma that comes with being famous. So it's just, you know, remembering that stigma is, we want to break that. So you want to avoid using words like junkie, calling somebody a junkie. Addict and alcoholic, some people will debate me on that, and that's okay. I understand, like Alcoholics Anonymous, whenever you say, hey, my name is so-and-so and I'm an alcoholic, there are some people in AA meetings who will not say that, who will say I'm recovering from alcoholism, probably because that's a word that's painful for them. So just being respectful of that and being considerate that maybe they totally might be fine with using those terms, but they might not be. And breaking stigma is watching labels, you know, watching those things. And there's many, many other terms too. Those are just a few. Reinforce that addiction is not simply about making bad choices. It's so much deeper than that. Advocate for the success of treatment. So treatment is doable. It absolutely can help you. Success rates are really high. Addiction is a treatable condition. So just advocating on that, like you're not doomed. You know, there is help and you can be successful. And then ask yourself, how can you help break the stigma in your own community? So just ways that you can do that. Just being thoughtful of that. So I can't believe I got through all of that. I sped through it. There's a lot. I had a lot of stuff, but please, I'm always open to like answering questions or talking. My heart is huge in this. So if you want to chat, come and find me. So y'all enjoy lunch. Hang on,